Welcome to Why Jerusalem, a new series about God's special purpose with this city. My special guest today is Reverend Willem Glashouwer. Welcome in the studio.
Thank you.
You are a speaker, you are a pastor, you are an author, and you wrote also Why Israel, but now you wrote a new book. The book is called Why Jerusalem. I'm very curious, why Jerusalem?
One day it dawned upon me that when you open up your Bible, that Jerusalem is a topic all in itself. Now we live in the days today that we see the miraculous return of the Jewish people to the Promised Land, to Israel, after a dispersion of almost 2,000 years. They're coming back. The prophets speak about it. We see it happen with our own eyes. We see them come back to the land, but we also see them come back to the city of Jerusalem. We see the international conflict more and more developing around Israel, around the land, but more and more also focusing on Jerusalem. When Jerusalem became again a unified city in 1967, the State of Israel was established in 1948. Immediately the city of Jerusalem was occupied for a part, the eastern part, by Jordan.
Yeah.
They kept the eastern part of Jerusalem occupied for 19 years, until 1967. Then in another defensive war that Israel had to fight, it became one city again, and in all the 3,000 years of the existence of the city of Jerusalem, it had never ever been a split up city. It was always one city.
Yeah.
When Israel was there living in the land, it was the capital of Israel. When Israel was dispersed, it became a neglected province, small town that nobody cared about.
Yeah, but today you only see the conflict about Jerusalem. Otherwise we wouldn't even really have attention for the city.
No. So now more and more you see the city of Jerusalem coming on the table of the nations. There's a very interesting passage in Luke 21. That's one of the passages where Jesus speaks about the future. When he speaks about the things that are going to happen in the future, he also speaks about Jerusalem. It is in Luke 21, and let's read it from verse 24. There he prophesies in 23 first, how dreadful it will be in those days for pregnant women and nursing mothers. There will be great distress in the land and wrath against this people. He's referring to the year 70 AD. He said there will come a great destruction upon Jerusalem. And the Roman soldiers came, the legions under the leadership of Titus and Vespasianus, and they besieged the city of Jerusalem. They destroyed the temple.
Bloodbath.
It was a bloodbath. The Jewish historian Flavius Josephus writes about it and says that the Roman soldiers waded ankle deep in the blood of Jews. He says 1.1 million Jews were slaughtered in the streets of Jerusalem. And so it was horrible. The temple was destroyed. And not a stone would be left upon another, Jesus had prophesied.
So that's talking about that period?
That's talking about that period. It will be terrible, Jesus says. They will fall by the sword, he says, and will be taken as prisoners to all the nations. And that's exactly what happened. The Romans took them captive, brought them to the slave markets. The price of a slave dropped dramatically in those days because of the great influx of Jewish slaves. And when you have a lot of one thing, the price drops. Yeah. So, prisoners to all the nations. And then he says, Jerusalem will be trampled on by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. He says, after the destruction of Jerusalem, the city will be tread underfoot by the nations, by the Gentiles. Gentiles are simply non-Jews.
Yes.
So foreigners, heathens, us will trample upon Jerusalem. Yeah. And that's exactly what happened. The trampling started by the Romans, who destroyed the city in the year 70. They did it again in the year 135, killed another 600,000 Jews. The Roman historian Diocasius says it was under the uprising, a Jewish revolt under Bar Kokhba, and that was the last thing. Then they took a plow, plowed over Mount Zion, the hill in the center of Jerusalem where the temple stood.
They totally destroyed.
They totally demolished everything. Yeah. And so they were rulers on that place.
But it wasn't so much about that they thought Jerusalem was a wonderful place or something.
No, not at all.
They didn't have a vision about Jerusalem.
No, not at all. They simply hated the Jews. And they hated that again and again and again they dared to rise against the almighty Roman Empire. Yes. And so they really hated them. Then finally Israel got a new name. By one of the Roman emperors. He called it Palestine. He deliberately gave it another name because Palestine refers to the Philistines.
They're oppressors.
And the Philistines are the arch enemies of Israel in the Bible. So he deliberately named that piece of land that we know as Israel, he named it Palestine. And he says no Jew is allowed to enter this hill in the center of Jerusalem. After the Romans, other people came, the Byzantines. They built on that hill a church, a Christian church. With
on the Mount Zion.
On Mount Zion.
Where the temple used to be.
Exactly on that place, which was octagonal with 8 sides.
Okay.
Then Mohamed came in after the year 600 after Christ.
Okay.
Islam came into existence and they conquered the land and conquered Jerusalem and conquered this mountain and conquered the Byzantine church. They demolished the church and built a mosque on the same place. And it's the only mosque in the world which 8 angles. It is called the Dome of the Rock with the golden dome that you see in every picture when you look at Jerusalem.
So it's still the foundation of the Byzantine.
So they deliberately gave the mosque the form of the Byzantine Christian church to show also to the Christian world their superiority. Taking even, this was a church, now it's a mosque. Then for centuries they trampled upon Jerusalem.
Yes.
They were masters, the Mamelukes, the Umayyads, various forms of Muslim people, sometimes from Egypt, sometimes from other parts of the Middle East.
Did they consider it as a holy city, or was
Not
it?
At all.
Was it very important for them in the Quran, or?
No. In the Quran, Jerusalem is not mentioned by name. There is one reference in the Quran that speaks about Al-Quds, and these Arabic words mean holy place. And they say about Al-Quds that it was a holy place most distant from Mecca. Of course, the center of Islam is Mecca. Second place is Medina.
And these are really referred to in the Quran, yes.
Yes, they are in Saudi Arabia, as you know. But there was a third holy place, most distant. So originally, the explainers of the Quran didn't even look at Jerusalem, they look into the other direction. There was a mosque very far away in the neighborhood of these minor Gulf states. There was a mosque which was very far from Mecca, and they say that is Al-Quds, a holy place as far as you can get from Mecca.
Okay, but if I understand it correctly, then for the Muslims it was more an historical place that gave Jerusalem its worth. But if we go back to the Bible and to the place where Jerusalem is mentioned the first time, I mean, how far do we have to go?
Muslims, much later, started to consider also Jerusalem as a holy place, because they say one day Mohamed had a vision that he was in Jerusalem and with his horse, and he jumped from Jerusalem into the heavens. Of course, that didn't really happen. He was lying beside his wife in the desert, so to speak, in the tent, but he had this vision. And that's the reason why they now say that Jerusalem is the third holy place of Islam as well. Only because of this dream of Muhammad going from to the heavens from that place. But Mecca has always been the center, and even if today Muslims pray,
they go to Mecca.
They pray with their faces to Mecca, even when they are in Jerusalem. They don't pray to Jerusalem or to the Mount Zion or to the Dome of the Rock or whatever. They pray towards Mecca. That's the central holy place. But for Jews, Jerusalem was a holy place. And you said, how did that come to be? That Jerusalem became such an important place for the Jewish people? Well, that's a fascinating story. I've written the book, Why Israel? It has been translated into over 20 languages today. It's also available as d.Hr Israel in Romania. Yes. And I think they're working on a Serbian translation, and they're working on a Polish one, and it's even in Arabic, etc. But that's about the return of the Jews to the land. That's
the overall picture.
The overall picture. But then one day I thought, hey, look at all the conflicts that are now more and more focusing on Jerusalem. The Palestinians claim it, the eastern part of Jerusalem, to be the capital of a Palestinian state that they one day hope to have there. The Jews have declared Jerusalem to be the unified capital of the state of Israel. But the world says, the United Nations, no. Yes, you can declare whatever you like, but we as the United Nations of the world, we will decide upon the status of Jerusalem, and we do not acknowledge your decision to declare Jerusalem into the capital of Israel. Yeah. It will be on the table one day in the United Nations, and then we will declare what Jerusalem will be. The Pope, who's considered to be the leader of all Christianity, has always said Jerusalem should be an international city for the three major religions, for Judaism, Christianity, and Islam.
A symbol of unity and...
or whatever. So, when Jesus says here in Luke 21 that Jerusalem will be trampled on by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled, apparently these times of the Gentiles have not yet been fulfilled. They are still trampling on Jerusalem.
Fighting over and...
Fighting over, they will decide what happened. And the most holy part of Jerusalem, being the Temple Mount, for Jews, it's forbidden for them. Yeah. Arabs rule the Waqf, the Islamic authorities. They are in control of the center of Jerusalem. So when in 1967, after 19 years of occupation, Jerusalem became a unified city, many Christian expositors of the Bible said, well, that means that now the times of the Gentiles are over. Israel has conquered it. It's become one city. But that's not true. Immediately, Moshe Dayan, who conquered in 1967
the head of the
eastern
army,
part, he immediately transferred the authority over this center of Jerusalem, over Mount Zion, he transferred it to the Muslim authorities. Because he very well understood that if they would take it and rule it and control it, it probably would have led to the Third World War. Because today it is considered by Muslims to be their third holy city. And so he said, no, you be in charge. So still, although the city is unified, although Israel has declared it to be their capital, still the nations will decide over it. The Christian churches have not decided their position yet. And Arabs, Muslims control the heart of the city.
But as you explain it now, you can only really understand the conflict because it has so many depths and so many layers if you really know the history. If you start at the beginning.
Exactly.
Because I know a lot of people who come to Israel and they see the dome of the mosque there and they say, but hey, but it is Muslim, so it is their place. It is. Look at the signs that are there.
Yeah, well, that's what also Palestinians and Muslim people today try to convince others of, that it has always been a Muslim place.
Yes.
They even deny the existence of a Jewish temple there, ever. So they turn historical truth upside down because it's absolutely clear that there have been the Jewish temples,
yes.
Temple 1 and Temple 2.
But are people believing?
But people who do not know their history
yes.
and do not take the pains to get informed from books or from the internet or whatever about the history of Jerusalem, well, they simply believe it. They see the mosque, say, hey, this is Muslim territory, etc. It is not. Jerusalem will be trampled upon by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. But these times apparently have not been fulfilled. I talked about the Muslims who ruled on Jerusalem, and then for 200 years the Christian crusaders ruled in Jerusalem. They conquered the land and the city, and there has been for 200 years a Christian rule over the city of Jerusalem. And in those times a lot of churches again were built in Jerusalem.
Yeah, you still see them today in Jerusalem.
Exactly. Then the Ottoman Turks, who were Muslim again,
yeah.
conquered the land again, and it was for 400 years under Turkish rule. Then the British came, and it was under the protection of the British until 1948, when the Jews came back to the land. The State of Israel was established, and in 1967 the city of Jerusalem became the capital of the city. But still the Gentiles rule. So the times of the Gentiles have not yet been fulfilled. The time of the Gentiles will be fulfilled if no longer Gentiles, in whatever way or form, have anything to say in Jerusalem and in the land of Israel.
But as we see it now, with your human eye, you can never imagine that there will be a time that no one will have anything to say about Jerusalem.
No. And that's why you have to start to understand why Jerusalem is such a special place. So when I had written the book, Why Israel, I finally came up to the next topic and stumbled upon this problem of the city of Jerusalem.
Because before you never realized that it had a special calling, or...
You have no idea. So what I did was simply taking a dictionary, biblical encyclopedia, and looked at Jerusalem. And there you have a couple of pages telling you all kinds of things of the history of Jerusalem. But also, because this was a biblical encyclopedia, it gave Bible verses where in the Bible Jerusalem is mentioned. So I simply started to start at the beginning,
Yes.
where the first time in the Bible Jerusalem is mentioned, and then went through all these verses in the Bible about Jerusalem, and then a whole new picture opened up.
You explained to me before when you wrote Why Israel, you had kind of a helicopter view.
Yeah.
But it looks like you started from the beginning and you had to do it step by step with Why Jerusalem.
Exactly. And then grew from the details to the bigger picture. And
Like a detective.
Which, as a detective story, it is really fascinating. It is wonderful. And then you start to understand the depth of the conflict about Jerusalem. Because there are many cities in the world, beautiful cities like
Yes.
Paris and Amsterdam, and probably Bucharest, Berlin, and Moscow, and so forth. But there's only one Jerusalem in the world, which is very, very special to the heart of God. And why is that? So maybe we simply start at the beginning.
I think that's a very good plan.
And follow the detective story.
Yes, because if you start at the beginning, when is it starting to mention in the Bible?
The first time you hear about Jerusalem is in Genesis 14. So that's in the first book of the Bible,
Okay.
in the 14th chapter already. The Bible first talks about creation, talks about mankind becoming more and more depraved and murderous, then talks about the flood that hit the earth. By the way, I get more and more interesting emails now that an expedition of Hong Kong Chinese together with Turkish people went, as many have done before, on Mount Ararat, and they claim that they found the Ark on the top of Mount Ararat.
And where is Ararat? Where?
It's on the 3 mountain point between Iran, Turkey and Russia.
Okay.
So it is an area that is highly sensitive from political angles, so it was always forbidden territory, but one expedition has gone there. And what I hear and see about it, not too long from now there will be a press conference, and they will show what they found and the pictures they could take. And
Okay.
highly interesting.
Yes.
But anyway,
we can talk about that.
That's a
in another
program in
program.
itself.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
But okay, then after the flood, after the ark landed on Mount Ararat,
Yes.
mankind spread again all over the world. And then you read about the Tower of Babylon.
Yes.
Then you read that mankind became very bad again. And then you read that God calls one man from the nations by the name of Abraham.
Yes.
Abraham is living in Ur of the Chaldees. Chaldees mean Babylon. So he's living there, but God speaks to him from heaven and says, Abraham, now you leave your land and your nation and your family and your village and your gods and whatever you have, you just go.
Yes.
Go to the land that I will show you. I will make you into a great nation. You will be a blessing. Everyone who blesses you will be blessed. Everyone who curses you will be cursed. But I'm going to do this with your life, Abraham.
Yes.
And Abraham says, well, okay, Lord. And so he goes. But the calling of Abraham you read in Genesis 12. And now we come to Genesis 14. So it is right in the beginning of the life of Abraham. Abraham is following the calling of the Lord. Maybe he thinks, now it will be all sunshine and roses and no problems. I follow God.
Yes.
And so nothing
Straight
can happen to me.
to the goal.
Yeah.
Yes.
The opposite is true. It seems that he meets more and more and more difficulties when he follows God. When he finally comes from Ur of the Chaldees, which is from the Euphrates and the Tigris rivers, he comes finally in Israel, the promised land. The land cannot even feed him. There's hunger in the land. So you're going for a land of milk and honey.
The promise.
The promise, you follow God's promise, and there's famine in the land.
Yes.
There's hunger. So he has to go further, and he ends up in Egypt. There was food, there was hospitality, he's well received, he's provided with food. But then the next problem comes. Pharaoh sees that he has a beautiful woman in his group, Sarah, and he desires her for his wife. And only by telling a half-truth, by telling Pharaoh, which is a complete lie.
Yes, basically.
She's my sister, he says. And there was some truth in it, because she was actually his half-sister. Yes. But she was his wife. So, but by telling this half-truth lie, he saves his kin, but Pharaoh kicks him out of the land and says, so overloaded with shame, he has to go very quickly leave Egypt,
yes,
back to the promised land, to Israel.
I'm very sorry, because it's very interesting, but we are almost closing the program. So if I have a look at this whole material and this whole conflict and this whole situation, we're now discussing the first time that Jerusalem is mentioned in the Bible.
Yes.
And I can only encourage the viewers to look at the next program, because then we will absolutely hear when Jerusalem is mentioned for the first time. We will continue our talking on this topic in this next program. And thank you for joining us. Don't miss our next program about Jerusalem.